I am very happy to welcome everyone at this first inaugural Innovative Universities Global Webinar, where we discuss the cases of higher education institutions which can change how higher education will function in the future. We came up with this idea last year with Professor Isak Frubin at the Observatory of Higher Education Innovations at Constructor University. And Isak, the floor is yours.
I'm very happy that we start webinar. We hope it will be a good series of webinar. And let me explain why we do that. Indeed, during last years, especially after the pandemic, we see a growing number of so-called global webinars. This is a new way of communication between professionals and also between high education professionals. There are very good webinars for high education researchers at Oxford, Hong Kong, and other places. But we want our webinar to be special. It will be about innovations, about living cases when practitioners and scholars will come together to discuss innovative ideas. We hope that founders, leaders, designers, participants of early stage innovations will share their experience. It will be inspiration for us. It will open a window into the future and will stimulate our practical imagination. When we started this idea, when we launched it, we found that today's world is full of very interesting university cases. There is a fantastic diversity, and you can see that we have now a kind of short list of universities that we invited already. Many of them agreed to take part in this webinar, and they are from all over the world, from US, not from US, by the way, from America, Sub-Saharan Africa, Asia Pacific, and so on. So I'm sure that in a few years, those who will watch and participate in these webinars will have a great picture of diverse ideas. We also want to look back to some radical innovations. So it's not only about existing innovations, but about the innovations that changed the field. Let me say also a few words about the construction of our webinar, about the process. So we want it to be once in 2 weeks, every second Thursday at 5 p.m. Central European Time. It will be 60 minutes sharp, and we hope that it will be more discussion. So the presentation could be 15, maximum 20, super maximum 25 minutes. But then it will be an interview with moderators and discussion. And we hope those who watch our live will ask questions through the special Q&A channel. And then we hope that recordings will be available on YouTube. I also have to thank our steering committee. We asked really great experts in global higher education, like Phil Albach from Boston, Jus Coleman from NYU, Daniel Kantowski from Amsterdam, Attila Paustis from Austria, Jamil Salmi from the world, and Boehnke from Peking University, to be kind of advisors to tell us, to point out interesting cases. And they helped us to build the program of the seminar. And it shouldn't be surprised that we start today from one of the very interesting cases, which is not completely new. It's relatively it's growing up. It's young, but not a childish university. Constructor University Bremen, that used to be International University Bremen, and Jakobs University Bremen. And in 2001, during the opening ceremony of the university, German Chancellor Helmut Schmidt, ex-chancellor at that time, made very strong statement. And he said that Germany urgently needs universities such as one being inaugurated in Bremen today, institutions that are modern, performance-oriented, independent of the reins of the state bureaucracies, interdisciplinary and international. And so it was a huge innovation for German higher education. And I'm very glad that two very distinguished scholars who are with these universities from very early stage with us today to tell us about this fantastic history and discuss with us what was the innovation, what are the main lessons. It's my pleasure to introduce Professor Dr. Klaus Boehnke, outstanding scholar in psychology and social sciences. Klaus was in the beginning of this university master of one of the colleges, and Professor Dr. Sebastian Springer, who is a professor of molecular immunology, but also one of the most loved professors on the campus. He got multiple teaching awards, and he shows the fantastic balance of great teaching and great researcher. Dear Klaus and dear Sebastian, the floor is yours, and then Dara will conduct interview after your presentation. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Isaac. And I think we have a few slides as far as I know. And maybe Klaus, since you put them together. Okay. Maybe you would want to give us a bit of an insight, because I remember that at the time your involvement in the structure of the university was much greater than mine.
Yeah, okay. This may be correct, and but it's other people's evaluation. I should say a few words that kind of noble this university, I think, because when I looked at the German weekly Die Zeit in I think it was in the early 2000, or maybe even no, it was early in 2001. I saw an ad of something that called itself International University Bremen. It was in all likelihood the first German university that taught exclusively in English. And I sat on a tenured full professorship at a German university. I sometimes later said I was probably the only idiot at this university who gave up a German tenured full professorship at a public university to join this experiment. And the experiment proved to be a challenge, but I must admit, I never regretted it a little bit. We first had an organization of the university into two schools, and we had a president who came from politics. He was a liberal politician from the Ministry of Education and Research. He had been a what is called a Secretary of State or something like that. State Secretary at this ministry, and he led this university through the first years. But more importantly than this, to me, were the two deans that we had in the very beginning, which were very renowned political scientists. And your dean was a former director of an institute of astronomy or something like that.
Yeah.
And what made it so intriguing was that at this university there was no ditch between the two schools, because we had and wanted to teach together. We had courses that they at that time called university studies courses that brought students, and it was obligatory or mandatory to take such a course, that brought people together from both schools, and they worked on topics of interest to both schools. The most famous one, and maybe Sebastian knows this image also, was a course that was labeled or titled "The Sun, the Moon, and the Planets," which was a course about, on the one hand, the man in the moon in fairy tales, and on the other hand, about the objective situation among the sun, the moon, and the planets. Okay, so as I said, I gave up a tenured full professorship to be drawn into this experiment, and the experiment has always been innovative and successful for me. And even though this sounds like saying something nice to the university leadership, I must admit, I never regretted it a bit. Although it was risky, I only had a 5-year contract at the beginning.
Yeah. I don't know if we are at the beginning perhaps obliged to actually say something about the content of the slides, about the history of the university. I don't know if you would like to do that.
Yeah, okay. It went on with something that was then. We had a second president, Joachim Treusch, who came from Jülich to us. But Isaac already mentioned that I was not so interested in the university leadership, but my wife and I became college masters. This was also something that was very, 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 very challenging, but totally alien to my prior experience at the German public universities. We are a campus university, and we were organized into colleges in the beginning, 2, then 3, very similar to what some American universities, but also the classic UK universities or English universities have. And that was living together with the students and having their woes and worries next door. And that was not easy, but this was also innovative for me. And I think, if I may also speak of mistakes that were done a little later, these college masters do not exist anymore, because it was, of course, a kind of an expensive endeavor to have college masters. And now they have kind of, social workers living in the colleges, which might be an idea, but I think it waters down the whole system.
It's not quite the same.
That's what I was intending to say. So but say a little bit about what your experience here was, and what your way to come here and was. Yeah,
but I think there'll probably be some questions eventually to that end. But it's definitely, the university has gone through a number of transformations, right? It became, I actually, just to say this very briefly, I came from the University of California in Berkeley, and I was actually hoping to get an academic position in the United States. And then I saw an advertisement in some newspapers, was the site where they were advertising 75 assistant professorships or something like this. And I thought, sounds good to me. And at the time, this may be actually useful to mention to the audience. So I asked our dean, my later on boss, Gerhard Herrendiel, director of a Max Planck Institute. And I said, what do you want this new university to be in terms of research? And he said, I imagine in the future, and I imagine it like a German Caltech. Yeah. And so I thought, oh yeah, I know Caltech. I like it. Yeah, sounds like a good idea. Let's go and set up a Caltech like institution in Bremen.
Yeah, if you
and this is how I got to come back to Germany in the first place. I had emigrated 9 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, if you what Max Kase, my dean, brought in was the straightforward and never disputed interdisciplinarity.
Yeah.
He was a political scientist, but he was always open for including the other disciplines of the social sciences, like psychology. I'm a psychologist from my training, but also sociology, and he had practiced that at his career institutions. But he, I would say, if you know him, you would see that as correctly. He enforced this interdisciplinarity.
Where did he come from?
He was at that time, I think he retired from Berlin, but he came from Mannheim originally.
So he was a professor. He's just been a professor or a dean.
He had been the director of important social science institutions in Germany.
Yeah. So then eventually the university grew and matured and morphed into Jacobs University in 2007.
6-7, around the turn of the year. Yes.
Yeah. And then
well, Sebastian, before you get into that, I see among our audience a couple of leaders of innovative institutions, and I know that this problem of attracting people for an experiment, I still want to stop at the beginning for a little bit, bothers them.
Go right ahead.
So the question here is, well, how can a new institution, which has just been born, successfully attract people from tenured positions, people with high potential? What can it do? So I'm asking you to extrapolate.
Yeah.
Well, I think the experiment, and knowing that there would be at least 75% international students, that I would be able to teach in English. I had spent my high school's junior year in the United States. To finally get students who are interested in what I'm doing, I would call myself a cross-cultural psychologist or a political socialization researcher or something. And what I had to teach was statistics and methods, and that's usually the best hated course for many of the social scientists and humanities students. And those students they forced me to really think about how to teach, how to get methods across. How do you do interviews? When do you do interviews, etc., etc.
I have a small addition from my side, Dara, and this is because my original view on this institution was a little bit different. I mean, Klaus came here. He was already, a solidly tenured German professor. Yeah, I was a postdoctoral fellow at University of California, Berkeley. And so I was attracted by the idea that the university would be set up according to the German model, where as an assistant professor, you're not the assistant of a professor, but you are a scholar in your own right, and you can do your own work. Yeah. It also has to do with this German idea of habilitation, which I didn't have. And yet I wanted to be a professor. I wanted to do my own research. I wanted to be independent. And so the idea of academic independence, for me personally, the promise of excellence, the idea of internationality, and the core idea of a private institution is that we would be more agile, that we'd be able to react more quickly to the market, that we'd be able to do things that the state universities are not allowed to do, or that they can't do because they are such big ships. Yeah. So you could use that image. You could say, you have the big ship and you have a small boat, and they both have their different tasks. But I would rather be on the small boat. Yeah. And that's maybe my answer. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is very important and plays right into what I would like to say. For example, I would add in the first 5-6 years of this university, there was, of course, different pay for what later turned out assistant, associate, and full professors, but the full title were never used. No. We were all professors, and there was no ranking visible even amongst the faculty, and that was something I enjoyed very much, and I think was an excellent idea, and it also brought the faculty together.
Yeah, I had escaped from the hierarchical German university system, and I thought, well, now this is actually an opportunity to come back because this is going to be different, and it was. It was.
So if I were to summarize, it sounds like you were given something old, so this really ancient collegial feel that everybody is at the same level, everybody can share an idea with everybody. You were also given something new, so internationality and interdisciplinarity that other universities didn't offer. And finally, you got dynamism. Would that be a proper way to kind of create a summary of your answers?
Yeah, and there's one more point that I think it was actually interdisciplinarity is one point, but here there was, to some part, even lived transdisciplinarity. I later developed, for example, very close research connections to people who work on the ocean, for example. Has nothing to do at first sight with social psychology or something like that. But that's all was also made possible through the initial ideas that influenced this universities.
So I understand why it was important for students as future graduates, but why was transdisciplinarity important for you? Isn't it easier and more comfortable just to focus on your own field without expanding into others?
It is probably easier, but
it is indeed. It is indeed.
But do I want an easy life? No, I want a challenging life. I want a life that allows me to think new thoughts, and I think that was very much possible here. And for example, if you now go for research money. Lots of my time is spent on getting new research money. For example, if you cooperate with other European academics in a program like, let's say nowadays called Horizon something 2020, but now it's called Horizon Europe something, you will never have people who are very close to you in what they do, but they come from not different disciplines, but different understandings on how to interpret what your discipline does. And I think that is something that is really practiced here in a way that I could never have imagined at my prior university.
Yeah, I would like to add something small from the perspective of the natural scientist. And for me, I'll call it interdisciplinarity for the moment. This is something that personally in my own style of research, I have always embodied. I always like to talk to people from other disciplines, even though, biochemistry and biophysics to you may seem like the same thing. Yeah. But I can assure you there are differences that the scholars find insurmountable. Yeah. So this is something when it said, okay, we're going to be interdisciplinary. Yeah, I thought this was attractive, although I knew, of course, that it is harder to get grants. Yeah, if your papers, your grants cross the fields. Yeah, but then this is something that's connected to the endeavor of a small private university that you have got. In order to be excellent in such a small place, you actually have to be interdisciplinary in the natural sciences. Because if I was a professor at, let's say, the Charité in Berlin, or at one of the great immunology institutes in France, or in Italy, or in the US, of course, around me, there would be 100 immunologists, and I would mostly collaborate within my own field. Yeah. Whereas here, the collaborations are, the easy local collaborations are interdisciplinary. And so one very good story is we used to have a common friend, Martin Zacharias, who was here in the very beginning. And he was just 2 doors down as a computational biologist. And I had never done anything with computation in my field. But it turned out, since we both like coffee very much, that we hung out together. And one day he said, why don't we put your molecule into my computer? Yeah. And we did, and it changed my field and it built my career. Yeah. So it's not just, so I would say in the very beginning, the interdisciplinarity was maybe a bit forced on us, not because it was in the program, but because of a small institution in Bremen, Germany. But then it actually turned out to be beneficial as we developed it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, very much. This was also, I think, the reason why we were then successful in the so-called Excellence Initiative, because we applied for a graduate school in the Excellence Initiative that brought together politicals, and this is then interdisciplinarity again, but it has to do with the small number of immediate colleagues you have. We brought together political science, sociology, and psychology, and this was unique among the applications for excellence funding. But I think the main reason why we could do that was because there were 2 political scientists, 4 psychologists, and 2 sociologists, and not 14 psychologists. That brought synergy effects that we wouldn't have experienced somewhere else.
So the thing about interdisciplinarity in the higher education landscape is that everybody talks about it, but very few universities actually manage to do it. So how would you advise to go about it? What are some do's? What are some don'ts that you can derive out of your experience?
Go ahead.
Oh, from my point of view, this is really quite easy. I'm not sure if this is the answer that you had anticipated, but we spend a lot of time acquiring funding. Yeah. So for an institution, it's easy to steer its own development through funding. So you could if you made grants, let's say, for PhD students available, or if you set up a master program or a graduate school that was centered around a particular idea, for example, fostering interdisciplinarity between the natural sciences and the social sciences, or fostering interdisciplinarity between biochemistry and biophysics, all you have to do is you have to fund a few such positions and then say, this way we'll try to get you to work together. And you can actually, with adequate steering, you can generate some sort of a coalescence of even the most diverse disciplines into one particular direction. Yeah, because that's something that, in this day and age, at least the natural scientists will always run after funding, and they will eventually then see the good side of it.
Yeah, but this is sometimes an uphill battle. Because as I think Sebastian already said that, the main funder of research, the DFG in Germany, the German Research Council, is still very much organized into disciplines.
Yeah, they don't like interdisciplinarity much.
No, they don't like it that much, and it's easier if you are top of the pops in a given discipline. However, then some years into the existence of International University Bremen or Jacobs University, DFG was also evaluated by an external expert group, and they were heavily criticized for not being on the top of the tide, because and only then were programs more developed, like research groups and research training groups that brought together several disciplines and not just one, as the DFG had probably practiced for decades.
Yeah, but I mean, to re-emphasize this a little bit, I think we have a special starting position as a small institution with relatively few people who are quite well aware, that the local collaborations by necessity have got to be cross-disciplinary. And that I think it makes sense. But universities can do a lot. This is definitely true.
Okay, so to sum up, you've got to have solid funding. You should be systemic about it, and you have to make it necessary so that no one can escape back into their disciplinary silos. What are some of the don'ts? So what shouldn't you do when it comes to fostering interdisciplinarity? If you have an answer to that.
I mean, it's very difficult to try to get people to do things that aren't funded.
Mm-hmm.
So there have been attempts also at this institution. They were never quite successful to get everyone to work on a particular subject. So let's just assume totally hypothetically that you set up, let's say, 5 areas of need for humanity. And let's call them maybe water, autocracy.
We had this, right.
Loss of species diversity and climate. And then you say, okay, the university needs to solve these problems. Now everybody should work on this.
This doesn't work.
This will never work.
No.
Because the researcher will come to you and say, well, I'm an expert in molecular immunology. I can only apply for grants in that area. I'm not, if I decide to work on something else, I won't get funded by my funding agency. So as a university administrators, you have all the power in the world as long as you have the funding to go with it. Then you can do anything. In fact, I'll tell you a secret that I haven't told anyone. I have actually, a few years ago, I have tried to branch out my laboratory into the direction of generating biological hydrogen, to run cars and all these kinds of things. And I found it incredibly difficult to break into that community because we had no prior data, we had no prior expertise, we had no prior successes. So in these cases, the university can do a lot. If they help out a little bit in the beginning, then we can generate data, we can publish, and from there on we can take it. It's not enough to say, oh, everybody should. So that's not necessarily a don't. You can always say everybody should, but this may not be super successful.
There's one more point that is a bit away from your question. I think what was totally underestimated in the very beginning of the history of this university was that it had the character of a bubble. We have a campus university, which is great and is wonderful to live in, but the contact to the surrounding community had always been very, very strained, if I may use that term. And this is something that I think also the university needs to invest in and has invested in lately. But in the beginning, we were those elitist people who claimed that they did something new that never happened anywhere else. And this was true, but it was always told to the public, and the most furious part of the public was the largest local newspaper who were fighting us from the beginning. But this has been overcome, but it took energy away. And I think what I can only say that if you are an innovative, a university or a tertiary education institution or a research institute, don't cut your ties to the real world. This is something I think to some degree this university has made a mistake in the first 5 to 10 years.
I mean, this was probably not the core of the question, but I will expand on this a little bit even, because I think it's a very, very important point that you made, namely that it's really important, no matter how innovative an international university is, it's got to remain rooted in the local environment, because that is where it is. located. Yeah, this is where the students live. This is where faculty lives. This is where people are going to look for jobs afterwards. Yeah, and that is where, you know, you can generate a million small connections to other university, to other educational institutions, for example, to the city government, to the city state, to the citizenship, to local foundations that give money. For example, my research now turns out to be funded by about 25% from local foundations here in Bremen. Yeah, and so of course it's necessary to talk to these people because they pay. Yeah. And this is something that definitely should not be neglected. Yeah.
And even to let an anecdote follow, the students who came here, 75% international students at an English-speaking university, they were surprised that they couldn't find a job after their excellent degrees, because they didn't speak any German.
If they spoke no German,
they thought, well, this is how it is in Germany, we're taught in English. Great, that was a major step that brought me here, for example. But the students sometimes thought, everything in life in Germany around is the same way, and every bigger employer only speaks English. No, that's not like the case.
So one of the main pluses with respect to internationality for this university is, of course, that if you take a degree here from this institution, that afterwards you have a visa for Germany to search for work. I don't know for how long, at least a half a year.
I think
it's more than that.
Yeah. I think so too.
And that actually makes it really attractive for people to come here and study. Very attractive. And there's a great need in the German economy for people exactly just like that. So we're actually fulfilling a really big need.
Exactly.
But throughout the various implementations of the study plans, you know, sometimes German was on them and sometimes German wasn't. Right.
I will use this opportunity to take you and the audience from research back to education. We've got a couple of questions here in the chat about the college structure. There are two. I will actually share both of them so that you can maybe combine the answers. The first one is, was it beneficial for students? And if so, why didn't you keep it? And moreover, why didn't other institutions pick it up? If it was good, they should have copied it, correct? And the second question is whether students have changed. So would it work today? It used to work in the past. If I hear you, Klaus, correctly, would it work today?
I think it has. It was kind of crippled by financial interventions. The colleges continue to exist. There are currently 4 residential colleges, but the college identity that used to be very, very important for the students, and it also gave them the feeling of being at home and at the so-and-so college.
Identity, sense of identity,
right?
Like you say.
But that was then more or less gone when there were no. Originally, there were faculty members who were the masters of the college. The entire role from janitor to receiving the President of the Republic was part of what we did at that time. But this was given up, and now they are dorms. And I think this was one of the, well, probably one of the few mistakes that were made in the development here.
Yeah, I would also say that to the people who are asking those questions, of course, if you want colleges, you have to build them. This means you have to have the land and you have to have the money. And this has also been a problem in the organization of the university. In the university, it's very, very clear that it needs to grow. And so if you want to grow the colleges, you have to have more colleges or bigger ones, and you have to have more land and more money to do this. And so this is you know, growing a collegiate university is a big financial issue. Yeah.
Sure.
If you don't put the students in colleges, then you can just tell them to go out and look for housing somewhere.
Yeah.
But if you want to accommodate all of them, then
you need more
this
space.
is a substantial outlay. We do have space, yeah, and the way it's done at the moment, of course, is that they say, well, you know, the students can move out later on, yeah, or in their later years or so, yeah, which is all right. It's fine. This is how Oxford does it, for example. Yeah, when I was in Oxford, the students only lived in college for the first year, and then they were moved out to some other places, or they looked on the free market or something. Yeah, but it's not the same anymore, like you say. Yeah, so if all the students live outside the campus, yeah, then they of course don't have a collegiate identity anymore, and that's something that was very good in the beginning. Why didn't other universities do that? Well, probably for exactly that reason, right?
It's in a certain way expensive.
Which brings us to the question of campus. So Constructor University, which used to be International University Bremen, this is being explained to the audience, is actually situated in former military barracks. So Klaus, Sebastian, how did that atmosphere and that very specific setup influence the students' experience?
That is an interesting question.
I haven't really thought that much about it. We had a award-winning first refurbishment architect. So there are on this campus, of course, there are buildings that have visibly been built in 1937. They breathe the architectural style of Albert Speer, but when this was turned into a university, we had really award-winning architects who inserted a few jewels, architectural jewels, into this thing. And there is a huge green in the middle of the campus. This green used to be a square where the military that had used this before, they used to drive their tanks. And so this has been turned into what they call now campus green, and it is used by the students for all kinds of recreation activities. And I do not see that much of military heritage here anymore. Yeah. We don't even do color guard or anything like this. Yeah. So if I walk across campus green, I think more like Harvard Yard or something like this. I don't think military base. Yeah. It's, there are red bricks, there's ivy. Yeah. Okay. That you find that at other universities too. What I can mention at this point, from the point of view of the natural scientist, is that the garages of the trucks were very, very good to reconstruct as laboratories, and the architects decided to leave some of the architectural elements of these old truck halls so that you can look a little bit at the heritage, but this could be industrial heritage. Yeah. It doesn't look military to me. It could be industrial. So it's got some parts of it. Our laboratories, they have a look of I would say of an industrial, an ex-industrial conversion area. Yeah. And the rest of it is pretty much, I would call it Ivy League. I mean, it's a fantastic campus. It's a wonderful place to be at because it's very green. And everyone who's been here loves it. I would extend an invitation to all the people in the audience to come over and check out our campus, either virtually. There's a very beautiful virtual tour on the website, or to come here and check it out. Yeah, when I first time hosted one of the famous German social scientists and extremism researchers, Wilhelm Heidmayer, some may know the name, he came here and said, "Oh, little Harvard." So it has, as Sebastian said, it has something that has really been converted into something far away from the military.
Beauty, yeah.
I think this holds a great lesson to all the founders of future universities. You don't always need architecture to have a great campus. You can just find something that is not being used and repurpose it. I actually distracted you in the beginning from continuing the story of International University Bremen, Jacobs University, Constructor University. Anna, could we bring the slides back? No, the previous slide. Yes. I also see the question about the dynamic of the university, what has been changing, what were the major shifts in its history. So which points, apart from the ones that you're mentioning here on slides, can you name?
You want to answer? What were the major shifts?
Yeah, okay.
And changes over the years?
Yeah, there were several. I said in the beginning that I never regretted having come here, but this university, of course, has had several major financial crises. And Sebastian mentioned that there needs to be sufficient funding. And of course, it is no wonder that within 10 years, Jacobs University at that time, International and now Constructor University, made it into extraordinarily high ranks in rankings for such a new university. But of course, there were major cuts. For example, in 2014, when many of our colleagues were threatened with having to be laid off, and luckily this didn't happen to many. But some said, "No, it's too dangerous for me. I leave." So we had a brain drain for financial reasons, and so. Finances are important. We also had the problem of tuition deferral of international students. Tuition deferral is you have to pay tuition here, of course. It's a private university, but you are granted a deferral that says, okay, you don't have to pay it now, but you pay it after you have finished your studies and when you have a job. Well, there were, of course, non-negligible numbers of international students who in the beginning of the history of the university just vanished. And the tuition deferral was then not a deferral, but the money was gone. And that made it very problematic. So this is something that, I don't know how it could have been avoided, but finances are unfortunately very, very important. And it is not that the professors here are paid exuberantly high, not at all.
Not me in any case.
In the beginning, my salary was a bit higher than I had it in the public university, but the increases were not part of a tariff union. So our salaries only increase when we have achievements, and if at all. And so finances is another issue.
Yeah. So changes, I would say, from my point of view, research and teaching, actually not as many as in the organization of the university. Research you cannot move away from if you want to have a university, right? So you can spend more money on research. You can, like I said, you can try to organize research in different ways. That was tried. Yeah. But the fundamental idea of how in the natural science, for example, research was done has not changed. There's also my study program was created in 2001, and it's remained exactly pretty much like that for all that time. It's the only program that has never changed its name and content in the history of the university. So maybe I'm not a good person then to ask about change, because research and teaching have mostly remained the same. Yeah? There have been various attempts at running the university in different ways, or there were, of course, there were changes through the introduction of the Bologna system in Germany. We were the first people in Germany to throughout. Yeah. Then there were changes by the introduction of accreditation for private universities. There were changes by the adaptation of a university constitution, for example. Yeah. So in governance, there have been many changes. In the philosophy, leadership philosophy, there have been many changes. But fundamentally, I think with respect to research and in my area teaching, not too many changes. Yeah. I know there are colleagues who would vigorously disagree, but for me, that's what it looks like.
I'm not one of them who would vigorously disagree. I see it
like,
similar.
Like in the old days, for example, we were teaching these interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary courses called university studies courses. I don't just remember the moon and the stars, but I also remember one very nice course called Monsters of the Deep. Yeah, so exactly. You can actually you can read some poetry about monsters of the deep, but you can also dissect some sharks. Yeah. And so it's a fascinating, fantastic, beautiful course. Yeah, but of course it costs the university twice as much because you have two professors running it. Right?
Yes.
Would we want to go back to those times? That depends on who you ask, right? It certainly was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which do you think were the main innovations that Constructor University has contributed to the German higher education over the years?
So from your view, were there any visible contributions, were any visible imprints of the university onto the German higher education system as a whole? Because you're tied into all these societies.
Yeah, sure. I'm a bit hesitant because I am still, a bit affected by this this allegation that this is an elitist bubble that has only itself in focus. But I would think that the introduction of English language teaching in almost all German universities, of course not as it is here exclusively English teaching, but the teaching English courses in essentially every academic discipline,
especially at master level.
Right. This has increased quite a bit, and I think we were one of the institutions who showed that yes, it does work. And it is not an artificial add-on, but it is something that benefits also the international integration of our research that's benefiting from it. Because if you teach in English, then of course you can communicate with another group of colleagues abroad, and if it's natural to do everything in English, this brought about better knitted international networks, I would say.
I would say from the point of view of research again, that most international colleagues, but also most German colleagues who have visited me here on campus, and I explained to them the concept of this university, like a full round research university in a small format with a private owner. Yeah. Most people were convinced that this would never work. I have to say this drastically. I still have the words of an American colleague ringing in my ears, and I think we have shown that this can be done. Yeah, and listening to my colleagues over the last few years, the university has built up a reputation for research also.
Yes, I very much so. Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah.
And so not just for innovative teaching, but also for research. And as such, it is an example in Germany that these kinds of things can be done. Yeah, it's also, for example, if now German public universities are considering setting up university colleges, so small institutions that are semi-private, inside the actual university, I could imagine that this institution can serve as a beacon for this kind of enterprise. And one should maybe also point out that it's not an advertisement, of course, but one should point out that many of our students go on to very nice, very beautiful international positions. And when I was a student at a German university, it was considered very, very, very unusual to go abroad, even for a PhD. And now these days, even if you ask, like my son is now just finishing his bachelor studies in physics in Hanover, and there are very few people who then go abroad for grad school or for their master's degree. Our students do this all the time. So they are, in a way, they are role models for mobility in the German system also.
Yeah, and one other point you mentioned, Sebastian, very beginning, that we adopted the Bologna sequencing of degrees. This also had the consequence that structured doctoral education was introduced here very early in institutions that were founded together with the Public University of Bremen, which meant that no longer would PhD students, the terminology is even almost unknown to Germany. Would they be the, as they say, I'll use one German word, the Kofferträger, the suitcase carrier of the professors? But graduate education is so closely knit to research that it is great to have so many young people who do their PhD in a structured program and do essentially also enhance the research capacity of the professors. Because if you have to advise somebody else's autonomous research project, you learn as an old man, as a professor. If you're confronted with young people's splendid ideas and have that as part of your teaching and research, this is something that would not have been possible at my prior university, for example.
We are approaching the end of our allotted time for today. Do you have any final advice to whoever wants to either create a similar institution, which is breaking barriers of disciplinarity and national boundaries, or to someone who is looking to transform the institution into something similar?
I think the one important thing that, as Sebastian said, support the let's say the forces of academic freedom, and do not force people into one view of what important research is, because that will kill creative ideas. And there is a certain danger that we should not fall for. So yes, let creativity grow out of the brains and minds of people who are here.
Okay, Sebastian, do you have any last words to say?
I got almost nothing to add, but of course, pursue excellence, guarantee academic freedom, because that keeps people motivated. Have faculty participate in the process, make them owners of the process, then they will be 150% involved. Right? Work with the students. Listen to your customers. Yeah, very important. And if you want, write us a postcard. Come see us.
Exactly.
Well, I have visited Constructor University, and it is really worth visiting. It's quite a special place. Thank you very much, dear professors, Klaus, Sebastian. Dear listeners, this concludes our first webinar. Could we have this slide, the last slide again? Our next webinar will take place on the 5th of October, and it will be about the University of Central Asia, which is a transnational higher education institution. Well, obviously in Central Asia, it's currently situated in two countries, in Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, and we will hear how that is being done, which problems they're facing, and what are they thinking about doing in the future. Thank you everyone for attending, and we are hoping to see you in 2 weeks.